Hello everybody. Do you ever wonder where your drinking water comes from? Today we're going to be talking about drinking water treatment plants and how they make your water acceptable for use. Drinking water treatment plants come in all forms, shapes, and sizes because they have different treatment goals and different source waters. Some of them get their water from groundwater sources, others from surface water sources like lakes, rivers, or streams. But today we're going to be talking about 5 major processes that are at a lot of conventional treatment plants. Those are coagulation, flocculation, sedimentation, filtration, and disinfection. Coagulation, or rapid mix as it is often called, is a process in which tiny particles are made easier to remove from the drinking water. These tiny particles are so small that they don't settle out of the water or filtrate very easily. Letting them settle out would take forever, and filtrating them would also be too hard because they're just too small. The particles we're trying to remove here are so small that they're more affected by things like surface charge and the attraction between molecules than things like buoyancy and gravity. The goal here is to get particles to stick together in order to form larger particles called flocks. These tiny particles, also called colloids, unfortunately don't want to stick to each other because of their surface charges that actually repel each other. This first process is meant to get them to stick together by neutralizing those charges with the addition of a chemical called a coagulant. That is pronounced coagulant. Once this coagulant is added, it's mixed around very vigorously, hence the name rapid mix, so that way it binds with each of the colloids and neutralizes their particle charge. That way, all of them can be friends and stick together in the next step, which we are going to talk about shortly. Now that all the colloids have joined together and formed bigger friend groups called flocks, they can now settle down to the bottom of the basin they're in. The sedimentation basin, or clarifier as it's sometimes called, is just a really long basin that gives all of these particles enough time, even the particles at the top of the basin, enough time to settle to the very bottom of the basin. Then these particles can be collected there, scraped off the bottom, and sent to waste management. The first 3 treatment processes, rapid mix, flocculation, and sedimentation, have now paved the way for our next treatment process, filtration. Filtration, as the name implies, filters out particles by size excluding them as they run down through some sort of media that's in the filter. When the water is flowing down through this filter, we need to measure how well the sand filter is removing those particles. We do that by measuring something called turbidity. Turbidity is essentially the cloudiness of the water. As you can see, we want water to look like this, very clear and not cloudy at all, usually with a nephelometric turbidity unit of less than 0.3. So a typical rapid sand filter, which is used in most conventional treatment plants, has several different layers. Typically, there are 3 major layers making up a sand filter. The top layer is usually made of some sort of large aggregate. Oftentimes that's coal, or some sort of coal. The second layer is the sand, which is why we call it a sand filter. This catches some of the smaller particles, while the larger media on top catches a bunch of the larger particles, so that way this sand down here doesn't clog up as quickly with all of those large particles. And then the final layer is usually a drainage layer, consisting of larger blocks that allow the water to seep through, but keep the sand and the coal from draining out of the filter. These sand filters need to be cleaned sometimes, however. This is done by running water the opposite direction from the bottom of the filter up towards the top. This loosens all of that sand and coal so that all of the dirt particles and whatever else was caught in the filter gets washed out from the bottom to the top. Once the backwashing is complete, all of that media can settle back down and all of the heavier material settles first. Does that mean that the coal settles below all of these sand particles and ruins the filter? Thankfully, no. Despite their larger size, those larger coal particles and coal media are actually less dense than the sand particles. That way, they settle down last, and the sand still settles down before them and creates that nice sand layer underneath the coal layer that we want in our sand filters. Our final treatment process is disinfection. This is where we add a chemical to the water that either kills bacteria and pathogens or inactivates them so they can't reproduce and soon die off anyways. The problem with a lot of these chemicals is that they produce DBPs. These DBPs, that stands for disinfection byproduct, are often harmful to human health. Some disinfection processes produce more DBPs than others. Some disinfection processes, such as UV light or reverse osmosis, or even ozone treatment, are other alternatives to adding a chemical to the water. Now, disinfection needs to be given time to disinfect all of that bacteria. So we put it into a chlorine contact basin. This contact basin has a series of baffle walls that allow the water to stay in there for a long time as it moves through. That way the chemical or whatever treatment process we're using has plenty of time to kill all of those bacteria. But even after the water leaves the plant, we need to remember that it's going to be going through miles and miles and miles of pipes. These pipes could have bacteria growing inside them also. So we want to maintain some sort of chemical residual as it's leaving the plant. That way that chemical can continue to kill pathogens in the water as it travels to our homes. Once water has been treated with all of these processes, it's ready for distribution to our homes and businesses. Next time, we're going to be traveling to a water treatment plant to see all of these processes actually happening in real life and get to meet the operators who make sure all of these processes work the right way. We'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.